Welcome to Your Partner in Success Radio, a program that values the potential of knowledge, collaboration, and growth. The show is hosted by Denise Griffitts, who is known as an intensely curious nerd in stilettos. Each Wednesday, she is joined by co-host Ben Gay III, a renowned figure in the sales world. Ben is recognized for introducing The Closers, one of the most popular and powerful sales training materials ever produced. Having been mentored by Dr. Napoleon Hill himself, Ben has gained a wealth of knowledge in sales and life. Throughout the show, Denise and Ben delve into the world of sales, entrepreneurship, and success, exploring Ben's vast experience from guiding and mentoring countless professionals to achieve unparalleled success in their careers. Together, they offer unmatched guidance to listeners seeking success in their professional endeavors.
Welcome, listeners, to another episode of the Closers Inner Circle podcast, hosted by Your Partner in Success Radio. I am your host, Denise Griffitts, and together with my co-host, Ben Gay III, we are diving into the world of sales mastery with this gem from The Closers, Part 2. Now, these books, Parts 1 and 2, are widely known as the Sales Bibles. So last week, we covered Power Closers, Listen Clearly, and that was from The Closers, Part 2, page 109. Today, we step into the world of sales mastery with a true legend in the field, my co-host, Ben Gay III, who is the acclaimed author of the books that I mentioned, Closers Part 1 and Part 2. And for years, Ben has passionately advocated consultative, is that right, Ben? Consultative?
Close.
Oh, I'm from the South. I can say it any old way I want.
That's right. I'm a Southerner too, so I speak Southern. Go right ahead.
Go. So it didn't matter how I said it. So
Now,
consultative, oh crap, I said it once already. Also known as power selling. I'm not going to try that word again. This approach goes beyond the transactional, emphasizing the importance of becoming a recognized leader in your field. So if you have the Closers books in your entrepreneurial library, open up the Closers Part 1 to page 113. Become an expert. Good morning, Ben. It's Wednesday, which is officially my favorite day of the week because I get to spend it with you.
how are you doing? It is a pleasure to hear, speaking of Southern, hear that sweet Southern accent. Talking to you, I always feel like I've gone back to Atlanta. You guys are somewhat different, but it
Right.
sounds familiar.
And see, I insist that I do not have an accent. I have a drawl. And if I'm tired, I can even hear it, and it's irritating. Like I'll say, "Oh, move the fireplace. Oh, move the fireplace screen." And I can hear it. But I don't have an accent because I live in Cajun country, and accents, as you know, are regional, and I do not sound like them. I never will. Don't want it.
No, not
Yeah,
at all.
we were talking about Justin Wilson in the green room. That was an accent that just made the back of my hair raise up. I hated it. It was so fake.
Yeah, Denise and I were talking, ladies and gentlemen, about Southern accents, and they are the worst when faked in movies or with Justin Wilson with his Cajun accent or whatever. When faked, it just makes my skin crawl. I think just don't even mention you're a Southerner, just read your lines.
Sorry, I pushed the wrong button. You're right. And it's kind of interesting. We tend to pick up on nuances in speech. And if you're faking it, kind of like anything else, if you're faking your persona on social media, if you're faking your voice, people are going to eventually pick up on that and go, "Oh, I wonder what else they're faking."
I've been blessed to have traveled a whole bunch, and I can pick up accents. People used to say neighborhood by neighborhood. It never was quite that good, but there's a significant difference between one area of Minnesota and another area and so on. But the two that on the phone I can almost never break up is a Southern lady from Dallas or Atlanta. Somehow they sound the same to me. Every time I guess, I've only got a 50-50 chance of getting it right. But I love accents and different regional ways of talking. I told you earlier, Zig tried to, when I decided I was going to train away my Southern accent, which I think I've done to a degree, but people are forever saying to me, where are you
The
from?
one I
Oh,
just heard.
yeah.
That one.
Where are y'all from? But I did make an attempt to train mine away, and Zig said I was making a mistake. And looking back, I think he was right because people love Zig could read a phone book and make it sound interesting because of his heavy Southern accent.
I think
And
I told you how I came across Zig Ziglar. I was out, my car had this thing back in the years ago about just driving itself to garage sales. It just managed to do it. I was not in charge of the steering wheel. And I get to this garage sale and I'm poking around. I didn't need anything, didn't want anything. It was just entertainment. And I picked up this little plastic binder, which I'd never seen. It was like a square. I still have it. And I opened it up and there were 6 cassette tapes in there. And all they said was Zig Ziglar. And I think it was 50 cents. The sticker said 50 cents. And I didn't even know how I was going to play them. I had to come home and find my boombox. But I didn't know what a Zig Ziglar was. So I got home, I cranked open the little boombox, and I instantly fell in love with Zig Ziglar.
yeah, he was really something.
He
He
was.
could charm and tell a great story. Zig's story, I hardly ever tell, it doesn't come up. Zig would tell you who he was talking about, Bubba so and so, names in the stories, and they were all allegedly true stories from back home. And one day he told a story. We worked together, and then he worked for me. But I learned how to speak in public by agreeing to carry that stupid pump around that he always had. I said, I'll carry it in exchange for front row seating at any seminar for free. And he said, fine. He was tired of carrying it too. So that's how Zig and I spent a lot of time together. So he told the story one day, and Zig used to laugh. He said, if I lose track, I just look over at you because you're mouthing my talk. I'd memorized all the stories and so on. And occasionally I would shake my head like, no, that's not the way we tell that story. And you'd see him sort of correct himself. So anyway, he told a story I'd never heard before. And when he came off, I said, Zig, that story, I forget what it was, but I said, it's really neat. I enjoy it. But you didn't mention who it was. You didn't give a name. And he said, I haven't gotten that far yet.
You know, when you were talking about that, these stories allegedly about somebody from back home, I instantly saw Jerry Clower pop up in my
Oh,
head.
yeah. Yeah.
Remember Jerry Clower? If I'm
Yep.
lying, I'm dying. I always thought he was one of the funniest people outside of some Cajun comedians from here. Some of them, if you can understand the accent, are just hilarious. But you have to be able to decipher. If you're not from around here, you have to be able to kind of go, what did they, oh, never mind. Somebody tell me what he's saying. It sounds funny.
Yeah. Yeah, I know when to laugh, the audience shows me that. But is there anybody here who can translate for me?
Right, right. But I didn't know that Zig, well, I probably should have, but when I opened those and I played them forever. In fact, I don't even think I have the boombox or whatever you want to call the little thing. I don't think I could play them now. But now, of course, we can find them online. So
Mhm.
I'm not bereft.
Yeah, he's bereft. That's a pretty fancy word for a Southern lady.
I know.
Uh, you decided to flash your education there. Is that what
I
I did?
did. And it's the one for the day. I'm out now. I'm finished.
Anyway, he was delightful and had a wonderful way of storytelling. I told Zig one time, uh, he said, do you think sales training will go on forever? And I said, sure, there'll be salespeople forever and they're going to need training forever. But should it fall apart, you got a great lounge act. The fact that Biscuits, Fleas, and Pump Handles, his 3 favorite stories, were about selling. All you had to do is not say selling anymore, and they were about life. And so he was just masterful at what he did.
Now, didn't Zig Ziglar work for you or with you at one point? I'm
Yeah,
sure how you.
September 15th, 1965, we both answered a little one ad in the Atlanta Journal Constitution, unbeknownst to each other. We didn't know each other. I'd never heard of him. And we went to what we thought was a job interview. It turned out it was an opportunity meeting with three people, my partner, Jimmy Rucker, and Zig. There's a cute story there, but I won't bore you with it because I've told it 8 million times about how we met and laughed at each other's names and so on. So we both joined the company, we became friendly competitors. And about a year into that friendship, they had a nationwide year-long, big mistake, but I wasn't running the company then, year-long sales contest, which I won by the skin of my teeth, and Zig came in second. My prize was the mystery prize, which turned out to be president of Holiday Magic Cosmetics, the big multi-level marketing firm, biggest in the world in its day. And he got second prize, a Rolls Royce. And there were many days when we'd talk on the phone, and I'd say, Zig, here's the deal. You bring the car out here, give me the keys. I'll give you the keys to the front door of the building. He would say, oh, no, you won fair and square, because the mystery prize was presidency of the company. And it was a mystery prize because William Penpatrick, the owner, told me over dinner the night he told me what I had won. I said, God, mystery prize, what if somebody had won it that you didn't like? And I knew there were lots of people in the field he didn't like. And he said, well, it was a mystery prize. I would just have changed the prize. They never would have known. But I like you, and I think you have a big future with us, and so you're the president. Said all that to say this. Zig and I started out working side by side in friendly competition. When I became president, I used to love to tell in a loud stage voice whenever Zig was within earshot. Oh, Zig Ziglar, of course I know him. He works for me.
Oh,
And
you're an
he
mean
was
man.
18 years old.
And he was 18 years older than you, right?
Yeah,
17.
yeah,
But yet
18
tell
years.
people how old you were when this happened to you.
I was 25 when I
Yep.
became president of the company. Way too young, but fortunately, Bill Patrick perhaps saw that. I was doing a good job. Sales are going up. We got it up to $1 million a day in late $60. That's about 3.5 billion with a B in today's money. But through it all, in the beginning, I was 25. Couldn't read a profit and loss statement. Still can't. Uh, and was winging it. So that's when Bill Patrick hired Dr. Napoleon Hill to be my personal coach, mentor, friend, and to give me access to a little age and wisdom. So that's how he came into my life. Zig was accidental. We both answered a one ad that only ran one day in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. What are the odds of the top two distributors in the world answering it?
What are the odds? You actually
1 in 7.5 billion now.
something like that. Yeah. I actually had to stop and think about that. So,
Yeah.
I don't know. I never
Yeah.
look, I almost failed algebra. I went and got my computer science degree and almost ran out of the building when I hit algebra because I hated it. It's a made up bunch of nonsense.
Yeah.
So I got
But
that
you
off.
use it more than you realize in little calculations you do during the day. A lot of that is algebra. A friend of mine was telling me, because I had the same problem. I was doing pretty well in school, although I was a cut up, but we got to the 5th grade and I got a crazy teacher, Fannie Mae Parks, who before the year was over, they took away. I mean, the guys in the white coats came and got her in class and took her away.
Did you do
And
that to her? I have to
I
ask.
was probably a contributing factor, but I wasn't the only one. Cute story. She had just come out of teachers college, so she wasn't there the end of the previous year when the faculty decided who was going to go in what classes. So they took all of us cut-ups. There were about 10 of us, all boys for some bizarre reason,
No,
and
really?
stuck them in Fannie Mae Park's class, and that may have pushed her over the edge.
Oh my.
But anyway, it was in that 5th grade that they took up algebra, and I became a disciplinary problem, and my grades fell off immediately. I just didn't get it.
Oh, I was definitely a disciplinary problem.
Yeah.
In fact, I actually stood up, I mean, because the instructor was saying, Denise, you're so smart. You're passing everything with flying colors. Why can't you do this? And I stood up, I got mad. I stood up, I said, because it's a made up bunch of crap that somebody who can't get laid made up to get even with the world. I don't like it. And I got sent to what would be called the principal's office if you weren't in college. And they took me and three other people who were just having fits in this class, and they put us near the boiler room and let us do our own thing. True story.
Put
I
you in
passed.
a special room.
Yeah, well, that happened to me a lot in high school too. I was always sent off to go somewhere and read and think, which was what I wanted. That's why I stayed in trouble. But, honestly, it's a big, I know I use it, but just I don't want to know I'm using it. I really hate it.
Yeah. It has to be cleverly disguised
Yeah.
for me. But if you draw a line and start that, above and below line and then put up parentheses, I go,
Yeah,
oh,
those
I've
are not
seen this
numbered.
before.
Yeah, those are not numbered. Give me a number that I can handle. If you
Yeah.
start putting all kinds of little symbols on there, that's just garbage. I'm sorry. My brain, and I'm a fairly smart person, but my brain cannot compute that, will not compute it, and I don't want to learn.
Well, I'm with you. And the teacher used to say, you've got to learn this. You won't always have an adding machine nearby. Well, actually, I do now. It's called a cell phone. And so there's nothing I can't figure out given a little time. But give me a blank piece of paper and some of those problems, my mind just shuts down.
Oh, same here. And I would look at them and just say, there has to be an easier way to do this. I had a 4.0 until I hit algebra.
Yeah.
I was not happy. And I'm still not happy now that I think about it. But it's well, you have to have it. No, I don't. You have to have no, I don't. We just that particular instructor did not like me very much. I can't imagine why. I was not a pain in his side. I was kind of entertaining to the rest of my classmates, but a long time ago, but I'm not over it yet. So let's talk about, it's interesting what you get stuck on. It's like, this is where I drew the line and I'm hanging on to it. I'm going to be mad for the rest of my life. Might as well have something like that. So let's talk about selling and power selling, because here's what I've read the whole book multiple times, but this is what I took away from it is that combining consultative selling and power selling creates a dynamic approach that not only involves understanding and addressing customer needs through active listening and tailored solutions, but also emphasizes the importance of building a strong personal brand and influence in the industry. So I think basically these are complementary terms, or are they the same term, just different wording?
They're complementary terms. Consultative selling is an attitude. Uh, Power selling is operating from a position of power and strength. But once you're in that position, you're doing consultative selling. We used to call it with Larry Wilson Learning Corporation, used to call it counselor selling.
Oh,
And that's sort of where it came from, including power selling, which I came up with as a way of going, well, you got the empathy thing down, that's wonderful, but you're not closing any sales. You still got to ask for the order or guide them to the order. Better yet, I like them to announce they bought. uh, I don't like to have to ask the question. I do from time to time, but pretty much we arrive at the conclusion together. And that's consultative selling and power selling combined. Slightly different, but they're cousins.
that's what I was trying to arrive at. So let's talk about this chapter, because I've looked at this one 2 or 3 times trying to figure out, was there a difference, a big difference between the two terms, or a slight difference, but you just explained it. They're cousins. That makes perfect sense.
And in this chapter, become an expert. I've learned that. I mean, it's sort of common sense, but most people don't do it. A lot of common sense things get ignored. But I learned it working on the sales floor at Macy's in the houseware department. It was called Davison's back then, but it was owned by Macy's in Atlanta. And I got thrown into the housewares department. I was hired for one day to take back returns the day after Christmas. For that, they put us through 2 weeks of paid training, which fascinates me to this day. I don't recall what they covered in 2 weeks to spend on an 8-hour day, one day after Christmas. But I turned it into a career. The lady who hired me, Barbara Franz, lovely lady, said somewhere in my job interview that she was going on vacation the day after Christmas for a couple of weeks, and she was really looking forward to it. So I took back returns the day after Christmas, knowing Barbara Franz was on a plane or in a car leaving town. And the next day, I just reported back to work, to the housewares department where I had been based before. And they said, "Oh, hi, what are you doing here?" I said, "I work here." And they said, "Oh, really?" I said, "Sure, call Barbara Franz and ask her." And they couldn't. And 2 weeks later, I was head of stock. I said, that's like a glorified stock boy and salesperson. And I was in the stock room doing something. The door opened. I turned around. There stood Barbara Franz back from her 2-week vacation.
I see.
And
I'm now flashing back to your teacher who was taken away, but keep going.
so I said, "Oh, hi, Miss Franz," and she said, "Nicely played, Mr. Gay." And I said, "Well, thank you." And she went away, and it was never mentioned again. Probably in the executive lounge it was, but not in front of me. So winding up in housewares was a great experience for me because they had counting, the gadget counter, the 88-cent gadget counter, whatever it was, and then all the other stuff, the hand mixers and the blenders and the this and the that. Housewares is the most diverse department in most department stores, any department store, I would assume. And we had lawnmowers, so we sort of bled over into what today would be a garden thing. So I had to learn at least the basics of about 5,000 items real quick. Some of them are simple. I mean, a can opener is a can opener, but that was one of the 7,000 items. And in the lawn mowing department, we had, I'm making up numbers, but I'm guessing 10 different brands and probably 15 different lawnmowers. Well, they're all designed to cut grass. And the first question people ask, is which one would you recommend? I didn't know. I'd owned a lawn mowing business when I was 14, but the lawnmower I used was my family's lawnmower. I just abducted it. I didn't know anything about it. I remember it said Briggs and Stratton on the engine, and that was about the extent of my knowledge. So I learned rather quickly all of the different lawnmowers and their advantages and disadvantages and so on. And the difference between a 2 horsepower and a 3 horsepower in a lawnmower, that's a huge difference. And the swath and so on that it cut as you pushed it around, or it pulled you around, as the case may be. And I became a resident expert in lawnmowers, which meant that when a man came into the department, generally I'd say 99% were men, came into the department and asked where the lawnmowers were, people would say they're right there in the back, and ask that young man right there, he's an expert in lawnmowers. So I was the go-to guy, and I soon found the advantage of that position. Grown men who've been mowing lawns as long or longer than I've been alive fell under my spell and did exactly what I told them to do. I'd ask 2 or 3 questions, how big's your yard, blah, blah, blah. Therefore, I recommend this one, whatever it was. And they would buy it. Just no resistance, nothing. So I quickly discovered, I'm not sure I put a title on it, that becoming an expert in your line, and of course, sales expert also, but becoming an expert in lawnmowers, or the one that's hammered on in the book most, on page 113, become an expert in the closers part 2, is automobiles. I give the example of a Lincoln salesperson up against every other car in town, but back then, Lincolns versus Cadillacs. If somebody comes into my Lincoln dealership, just like in my lawnmower department, and starts talking about Cadillacs or asking questions or whatever, I wanted to be, and our listeners should be, in the position to know as much about the competition as you know about your own stuff. So, I don't have to say, well, I don't know, go ask the Cadillac guy if theirs does this. I knew the competition in everything I've ever sold rather quickly, as well as I knew my own stuff. And I knew what they were going to ask, and I knew the advantages and disadvantages. And occasionally, I would say, for what you want, you need to go get the Zwicky 2000, and we don't sell it. That would be best for you in your unique situation. And then maybe give them a backup. Of course, you don't get me over there. So if you were going to buy it for your needs, if you were going to buy for that situation, here's the one I would recommend from those that I have. But the Zwicky 2000 is better for you, and you should know that. That ensures that you'll get the next sale from him or her, and a lot of the referral sales from their friends, neighbors, and relatives, because you're an honest guy, A. B, you know your stuff. And so that's boiled down the essence of the importance of becoming an expert in what you do. It shuts off them having to go check with your competition. Not unlike in real estate. In real estate with multiple listing service and now on computer, just about any realtor can sell just about any piece of property, and all the news about it is right there. Odds are your prospect or your customer client has already done it. They know as much as you do about the basics, 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, whatever. In cars, it's the same thing, but they want to talk to someone that they know, like, trust, and can feel safe with. And that's your job, is to become that person who's steeped in the knowledge of the industry in which you're selling. So, when they say, well, what about this? Gigi still does it. Gigi, my lovely wife, used to be a realtor. Her dad owned one of the more successful real estate companies around here, and she sort of drifted into that. But she grew up here. Her family's been here in a little town of Placerville, where gold was discovered, for over 100 years. I hate to meet somebody because her first question will be, what was your maiden name? And I think, oh God, here we go. Gigi will do everything but get out a standing chart and start drawing circles. Or oh, well, she was married to Bob, who moved out of town after the girl got pregnant, and starts down through the lineage of whoever she's talking to. It's incredible. She does the same thing with property. Oh, really? Where do you live? Well, we live up on Arbor Avenue. Which house on Arbor Avenue? So-and-so. Oh, yeah. Denise Colby used to live there. I've been in that house many times. Does it still have the, whatever? She was a tremendous realtor because she knew her inventory. There almost isn't a house in Placerville that she hasn't been in, socially or business-wise. The houses, we have a house and a guest house. The houses we're in, 10 years before we bought them, I'm guessing, she was in as a realtor. And so we bought them without going in them. The renter who was here didn't want anybody in the house. They didn't want to move. And so they made it difficult. And I said to the realtor, well, I'd like to sort of see the house. I got to have some personal space, office space, shipping space. I got to know what's in there. And Gigi says, oh, don't worry. I know both houses well, and got out a piece of paper and started drawing. So the day we bought the houses and closed and I walked in was the first time I'd ever seen the inside of either house, but I knew where to go and what to look for because Gigi knew. And she knew there's 50 houses in our subdivision or neighborhood, whatever you want to call it. And Gigi knows the floor plans of every one of them. She was here when they were being built. She knew the builders. She knew the people who used to own the pear orchard, which sat on this property, the Kumbelek family. And so and so. If you to this day, people call her, Gigi, we're thinking about buying so and so. We know you're not in real estate, but, and she's all right. You walk in the front door. To the right is a den. To the left is so and so. I can't find the den in our house, but she knows the interior layout. Our little town has 17,000 people in it, I think. Divide that by 4, that's probably roughly how many houses we have. Gigi knows 90% of them, and who used to own them. Oh, you live in the Smith house.
Right.
Yes, yeah.
Right. And
So
I trust her. That goes back to what you're saying about know, like, and trust. And like you, I didn't see my house because I bought it in between Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, and I bought it that day, sight unseen, because there was a panic going on, as you can imagine.
mhm,
But I didn't trust my ex-husband, sadly. He just wanted a house. We were in a rental. He wanted out, and he was going to buy anything that we could afford. I wasn't. But I trusted her judgment because she listened very carefully, and she called me. She said, look, this house came up today. This is a price. Go to your computer, look at the pictures. It has everything you want. Giant trees. It was only a year old, the house. It was not in an HOA. It had massive windows. And I said, do I want it? She said, you absolutely do. And I said, okay, get the papers. I'll get there in 80. I was 80 miles away. I didn't see this house until after I had met with her, signed my life away, and saw the house between 9 and 10 o'clock that night. But I trusted her. And
she
she was
was
right.
she was a consultative seller. She was a power seller, and she met all the requirements of what I described 50 years
Exactly.
ago. Know, like, trust, and with whom you feel safe. If you got those covered, they'll buy. And I don't mean they'll buy anything, but they will trust you to have found anything, or they will trust your advice on a car or a lawnmower or what have you. I went through as a mistake, but no harm done. I fell in love with dome houses. I'd never been in one, but Buckminster Fuller, Bucky, as he liked to be called, worked for some seminars, and he talked about dome houses because he had not invented. God did a dome house when he invented a bubble and put it on something, but Fuller figured out how to use that and why it was of advantage and so on. And then for my teenage years, a friend of mine in Atlanta, his family had an A-frame up at the Lake Lanier. And I just thought the A-frame, I was young and stupid, was so cool. So I said to my realtor out here one day, I'm looking for either a dome house or an A-frame. And she said, well, that's unusual, but okay. And you want to see anything else in the meantime? I said, I'm in no rush. Why don't we see if we have those? Oh, and preferably on little acreage, because I was from the city, Marin County in Atlanta, and having acreage seemed like a good idea. It's not, but seemed like a good idea. So there's 3 bad ideas in one: acreage, dome house, A-frame. And about, I don't know, a month later, I guess her name is Jan Dowen. She's no longer with us. Jan called me and said, Ben, I think I found your house. I said, does it meet my requirements? She said, well, it's a dome house. It's got, I forget what it was, 4 or 5, but 4 or 5 A-frames sticking out the side of where the windows, front door and back door would normally be. And it's on 10 acres. I said, well, let's go see it. We drove out. Before I got out of the car, I'd made up my mind and walked inside, blah, blah, blah. I said, write it up. Let's do it. Um, she was a power seller and she listened. She didn't phone me and say, I know you want a dome house, but I found this little mobile home. You know, I didn't get any of that nonsense. I didn't hear from her till she had A-frames, dome houses, and acreage. Power seller, consultative seller who listened with a capital L.
Right. And that's what it takes. And with my house, one of my other criteria was it needs to be in a rural area. It used to be a lot more rural because this house, we have 3 streets wide, 3 streets deep, but it was built on an old plantation ground. which is now all
Hmm.
around us, has been knocked down, and I keep losing my way to get to the grocery store because they keep moving my landmarks. I get lost very easily. But she listened, because the houses that we had looked at before, where I kept saying no, oh my God, no, there's yellow lines in front of the house. It's like, dude, do you know what the traffic's gonna be? Like, no, that is not rural. But I say he wanted something, anything to get us. We'd sold and went into a rent house that was small, and it was not fun. It just wasn't. But and I wanted to go back to something that you mentioned earlier, where you were saying that you knew, about the Zwiski or whatever it was, and you didn't have it, but you were making sure that you were going to put the right product in the right customer's hands, even if that meant, like, Mr. Macy and Miracle on 34th Street. We're not that far from Christmas, so it's fresh in my mind. But when you treat people right, you say, we don't have it, and it's probably going to be the best thing for you, head on down the road to Macy's. And
Yep,
you're right, people do trust you for that. Your boss
absolutely. And
may not like it, but your customers will.
I'm not just looking at today's sale. I've told you before, I do business with people on a regular basis to whom I sold the first product or service over 60 years ago. So, and they're still, those who are still alive are still with me, or at least checking with me, which brings me to another important part about what we're talking about. If you don't get that sale, you still become the person to go to, the person to check with, and they'll refer you that way, which means I get first look at lots of things, whether it's selling them something or investing with them in something or whatever. I tend to get first look because they say, I don't know, but I'll tell you who does. Call Ben Gay.
Exactly. And the goal of this chapter is to establish long-term relationships through advisory expertise, and simultaneously position yourself as a recognized leader, which you've said several times.
Yep.
I pick up referrals from 10, 12, 20 years ago. I've been building websites for 20 years. I'm still in contact with most of my clients. Some have, maybe they're just not here. One man moved to Germany and shut everything down. He was done. And, it just happens. Or, sometimes they just, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. But I very, very rarely lose a client because we had a falling out. They'll still come to me. Even it was 10 years ago when I built that site. Denise, there's something wrong. Can you look at it? You bet. Yeah,
Sure.
happy to.
And through the miracle of computers and the internet, we now have the thing. I didn't used to like the term, but now I understand it better. Drip marketing,
Right.
just staying in touch. I find some reason to send out something to almost everybody I've ever done business with at least once a week. Right. And what it really says, no matter what the subject, no matter what the text really says, the message is Ben Gay is still around.
Right. Right.
I'm still here for you. And I don't, people say, I read your email. Really? What did it say? Because I frequently don't recall. It was an excuse to drip market. And then, you're going to lose some. We had a dear friend who used to set up all of our travel and everything, and they introduced me to a priest, uh, and who became a really neat guy and a close friend. And we lost touch over the years. He was based in the Bay Area and then retired, and sort of. And one day I forget whether he called me or I saw something about him and called him. But anyway, we got in contact, and I said, what about Russ and Connie Fisher? He said, and they're the ones who introduced him to me, and they're the ones that did millions of dollars in travel arrangements for Holiday Magic and me after I left Holiday Magic. And I said, what about Russ and Connie Fisher? How are they doing? He said, Ben, I haven't talked to them in, I don't know, 20, 25 years. I don't know. And I said, you don't know Russ and Connie Fisher? They were among your dearest friends and good
Right.
Catholics and so on. And he gave me a bit of wisdom that has really helped me. He said, Ben, time and distance take their toll. So there are those, if somebody is getting up in years, or should be about now. And I think I'd like to reach out and call them. I've learned to really think that through and maybe do a little research, because I've called lots of people who aren't with us anymore. I hadn't talked to them in 30 years, and suddenly their name crossed my mind. I Googled them or whatever and came up with a phone number and called. And I'm talking to their widow or their new husband or, whatever. Time and distance do take their toll, but the rest of the world, if you've done business with them through drip marketing, becoming, in their eyes, an expert at what you do and a good person, that's crucial. A good person, someone they know, like, trust, and with whom they feel safe. Just stay in touch. Let them know you're here. It doesn't have to be a big deal. Could be 2 sentences. I frequently just send out a quote that strikes my mind. I have one here that I'm going to send out in the next few days from my mother. She was a little tiny person and a very sweet person. And one day in a conversation, I said, Mom, everybody, loves you. And I was giving her some compliment. And she said, well, I do no harm, and I take up very little space. And I thought, is
My
that
mom,
great?
my mom was a pocket Venus too. I used to tell her when she was around me and we were out in public to wear red because she was not in my line of sight and I kept losing her.
My mother would have been that way too, but I do no harm and I take up very little space. I thought that is powerful stuff. I've used it a few times over the years and in casual conversation, but I'll turn that into a reason to reach out to several thousands of people before this week is over. And the real message isn't what my mother said. It's Ben Gay, the super salesman, the man who knows just about everybody worth knowing, directly, indirectly, or within 2 or 3 degrees of separation, is still alive. I'm still here. Feel free to reach out.
And you've told me that before, and I've really, the first time you said that, I went, oh, because it made so much sense. And you've said it before, a couple of times on this podcast, and every time it just kind of grips my throat because I'm like, we all go. We all do.
Yep.
So do what we can, to be here while we're here. And I know that sounds puerile, but it's all I can come up with right now. Second word, woohoo! Oh, and I think I've been practicing consultative. Is that right?
Yep.
Cons-
Yep.
Oh, right. I finally got that word. So I think we're done here. I can't talk. I've done 2.5 words well. So like, oh, right. Okay, but let's keep going. So I'm reading on page 114, and you and I talk about scripts a lot. I use them, I use them for my podcasts. I use them for, particular letters or things that I'm going to send out. I have to, and they're going to change up, but I have to have a script. I have to know where I'm starting, where I'm ending. But here I'm reading on page 114, it says, it looks like you're saying, well, Mr. Prospect, it looks like you have a script going on there.
Well, a script, it's one of the most frustrating things I've ever dealt with in sales training, ever since I was brand new, just starting out, and a script that I refused to learn.
Right. I remember.
Almost got me thrown out of the company. And then once I learned it, I became a millionaire. I mean, that's pretty persuasive. And I would encourage you to use a proven, tested script. But all it is the best, what has been found to be the best way to explain this or that. In direct mail, nobody thinks anything about it. They work on a letter, they finally get it perfect. They still work on it, but once they get it perfect, that becomes their control piece, and that's what they mail out all the time. The Wall Street Journal's classic letter, 20 years ago on a spring day, 2 young men graduated and blah, 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 and it goes on. They've been mailing that letter, I believe, I've looked it up once, and I think my memory's right, over 50 years, and I don't think they've changed a word, maybe a word somewhere, I don't know where, but because it's effective. Well, everybody who's been in selling over 30 days is on a script because we tend to say the same things over and over again, maybe not out of brilliant sales psychology, but out of laziness. And that's what they were saying when I walked in. So I said that, and then I changed it a little bit here and there. And you tend to say the same thing over and over and over again. So no one is against scripting. They may not be real sharp and they haven't figured out they're using scripts. No one's against them. So since you're not really against them, once you understand the concept, why not use the best one you can possibly? I'm thinking while we've been talking about the script I used to use for the Foley quad cut, 42-inch swath, looked like a boomerang, one of the lawnmowers I sold at Macy's. And I got the script down. I could do it in my sleep. I didn't know it was called a script. I just said the same thing over and over and over again because it tended to sell lawnmowers. That company was going into bankruptcy. My buyer bought the last 500 and I personally sold them all. They said, who's selling all these lawnmowers? They went into bankruptcy because they couldn't sell them. One guy in Atlanta sold 500. Regal Wear, which in Kewaskum, Wisconsin, is in business today because of my buyer, Cy Fisher. They were going into bankruptcy. He bought all of their 5-piece cookware sets. And that's a 1, 2, 3-quart saucepan, a fry pan, the lids for all of them. So it's more pieces than that, but 5 cooking utensils. And we were selling them a 5-piece set for $39.99. Now that was years ago. It would be more today, but I see cookware commercials on television now, and I think they're selling them for about what I was selling the Regalware for years and years ago. And I sold so many so quickly. Regalware fired up their factory and started shipping more, and then more to all the Macy's stores, and then they were back in business because one kid learned a script, loved it. I was blessed with foot traffic. I didn't have to go prospecting. They came up the escalator to the 3rd floor because they'd seen the ad in the paper. And our stock people got tired of hauling Foley quad cuts and Regalware cookware down 3 flights of elevators and loading them in the cars and so on. All of that was due to scripting. I didn't know it, but I figured out an effective way to describe it. And being lazy, once I figured out an effective way to describe those items and lots of the other items in the store, I sold the first Teflon fry pans, $4.99. How did I know they were going to poison people later? But
Do they? I didn't know that.
it peeled off, and so it
Oh,
became a health problem. You
see,
don't
I
hear,
cook with Magnolite and cast iron. So,
yeah, you don't hear much about Teflon anymore, but you got to start somewhere. And that was the starting point. It was $4.99. And I became like a carnival barker. We had a lady there, Joan Oster. She really worked for the Osterizer people. So that was the stage name, like Betty Crocker. But she was a wonderful pitch person. And I used to sit and watch her. And then one day she was going to lunch. I said, "Can I do that?" She said, "Sure." And when she came back, I'd sold about 40 Teflon pans, as best I recall. And the reason was I learned her script. And then even though I was a young man, blessed with a male voice, I could get a little more attention. They started hearing my presentation as they were coming up the escalator to my right. I remember right where the thing was. And so she said, "All right, show me what you're doing," because I was selling more than she was, and she was an old pro. And so I told her, and her sales went up. I was kidding about the Teflon, but it did have a tendency in a couple of years to peel off. And of course, the do-gooders swept in and proved that that was poisonous. And I assume they've either solved the problem or quit selling Teflon coating. But it was a miracle in its day. But a miracle, they say build a better mousetrap. The world will beat a path to your door. True, but they won't buy unless you have a good way of explaining the new mousetrap. So Macy's was bringing them into my lawnmower. They were bringing them into my Regalware cookware. They were bringing them into the Teflon fry pan. But once they got there, they had to have an effective presentation from someone who appeared, I underline, appeared to know what he was doing.
Well, but you did because
On
you
that
had,
one little subject, yeah.
right, right. I mean, it, listen, if we're going to sell something or flog something, whatever, however you want to put it, you need to understand the product. I mean, I'm a web developer. I understand web development. And I also know what you really don't need. And I'll
Hmm.
tell you, because I have so many consultations where people say, oh, well, I want this and this. Why? And once we go into their why, I'm like, no, you need this, this, and this. Oh, it's, you have to be able to look at the product, look at the buyer, and give them the best that you can give them. Whether
Absolutely.
it's a consultation, whether it's something tangible, like a frying pan, or something kind of intangible, like the idea of a website that's going to get them more eyeballs.
Yep. That's it always comes down, you and I've discussed this before. People are always asking me, how has selling changed over the years? Back when you were selling with George Washington is sort of the implication. And I
It
and I
wasn't
yeah,
George
I sold
Washington.
him his saddle.
It was one of the Roosevelts, had to be one of them. I
So
can't tell them apart.
the my answer is selling hasn't changed at all. It's basically the same as it was when the silk traders were selling a couple of thousand years ago, and when the Yankee peddlers in America were selling 300 years ago on horseback. They all had scripts. They all were selling products that were needed, or they created a need, and they always kept in mind the buyer is asking themselves at all times, what's in it for me?
Right.
Here's one of the ways I keep sharp over the years on the subject of selling, because you can get sort of lackadaisical. My lackadaisical. My closing rate is 86%, and I'm sometimes I'm drumming my fingers on the desk, waiting for them to come to the conclusion that I knew they were coming to 30 minutes before. But the way I stay sharp and get reassured that scripting is good is I go to, as the only 4 or 5 within driving distance that I'm willing to drive around here, but I go to county fairs, business shows, almost anything that goes to our local fairgrounds that's going to have booths within it, because I'm looking for the guy who's standing behind the counter saying the same thing over and over and over again, because his father or grandfather perfected that script with whatever the product was then, and it's improved over the years, but they're still using the same script and they're still acting surprised. They still make the same mistakes and then giggle about it and wipe it up or whatever and go. And if you stand there 5 times, you'll see them make 5 spills. And then occasionally, one guy, I wrote about it, and I think in the closers part too. Uh, I I had seen whatever the product was on television. I had bought it. It was good. And my friend Johnny Hyde, the famous disc jockey, and I went to a county fair, and the guy's got that item. And I said to him, um, "Excuse me, I have one of those. My friend wants one. We don't need to hear your presentation much as I'd like to. Can he just buy one?" And the guy said, "No, because then I won't get to say the presentation and other people won't overhear it. And so I'll lose business I said, by just handing it to him, we can do it secretly, slip it under the counter. Now he's got to hear the presentation." I said, "Well, you have a lovely day." And we walked around the
Oh,
aisle, and there was another guy selling the same thing along with some other stuff. And I told him the story. I said, "Is there any chance of us just buying a pan without hearing your whole deal?" He said, "How many you want?" I said, "One."
really?
Good. Bang. Handed John his fry pan or whatever it was. But you watch the real good, and I hate the term, but in their case, it's accurate. Watch the real good pitchmen and stand there, not just watch them and go on, stand there through 4 or 5 presentations, and everything that we've been talking about today, you'll see displayed. They say the same thing word for word. They laugh in the same place. They answer the same questions because it's like the audience is also trained. The audience comes up and they ask the same 4 questions. There must be a secret room somewhere where they train prospects.
It's a performance.
Yep. And it is, it's show business. As I've told you, every time I leave the house to go to the office or leave the office to go to a prospect or the airport, when I step out of the door, I say, it's showtime.
Right.
I
Right.
never forget, this is show business. Is that people say, oh, public speaking, is that like show business? Well, it's show business for ugly people. But yeah, it's like show business. We're putting on a show.
We
I
are.
may, when I'm giving a seminar, it may not be exactly like the seminar that I gave the day before or will give the next day, but the stories within it are word for word the same. The only thing I might do is change up the order based on time or based on the audience reaction. I've told you when I go on stage, if the person has read my introduction the way I wrote it, I get a standing ovation. I hate people who get creative when they're supposed to read a script that's been tested thousands of times. But if they read it properly, I get a standing ovation. As they're sitting down, I say to them first, okay, let's get this Ben Gay thing out of the way. And what I'm really doing, it's my opening temperature taker. If I get mild laughter, I've either talked to them before and forgot, or they're not in the mood of the last group. So that alters the first story I'm going to tell, perhaps. But the story I tell is word for word the way I say that story every time because I've figured out what works. I've tried all, I'm like Edison with the 10,000 failures. I've tried every way to tell that story that didn't work. I finally found one that would work. And therefore, when it come off, people say, that was unbelievable. You talked without notes. I have hours of material in my head, memorized word for word. Mark Twain used to be done by Hal Holbrook. Hal Holbrook said that he had memorized word for word 9.5 hours of Mark Twain's stories, word for word. And he would tell, like the Ben Gay joke, he would tell the same opening short story every time. And based on that reaction to that story, he would reach back. I always picture a jukebox with the arm going back to get the next record and bring it forward. Based on the reaction to that first story, he'd reach back into the vault and pull out a story that fits that crowd. And he would tell that story. And based on the reaction to that story, determined which of the 9.5 hours of material, he only did a 2-hour show, including the what do you call intermission. He would tell the next story. And he said, I'm not sure he could have proved this, but he never gave the exact same presentation twice, because one, he left out 7 hours of material every time he did 2 hours worth of material. 2, he changed up the order. But within the story, I've come to call them script chunks. Within the story he chose next, he used a script chunk, word for word. And the same thing in the sales presentation. I don't go, hi, this is Ben Gay, and talk for 47 minutes and ask me to give you your credit, ask you to give me your credit card. The presentation may be 47 minutes long, but the next story or part of the story you hear is based on your reaction to the previous one. But when I tell it, it's word for word, the way I've been telling it for years now.
And see, I find this fascinating. And when you talked about the peddlers that used to travel around the Wild Wild West.
Yeah.
As you know, I love to read. I'll read the back of a cereal box, and I hate cereal, but if it's anything in front of me, I'll read it. I'll know all about that multicolored garbage that you're putting into your tummy. Lick the box. That's where the nutrition is. But I read history. I mean, I love history. And I remember while you were talking, I kept flashing back to snippets that I've read, different times in America in particular, and even in England, because there are peddlers everywhere. And you're right, those stories are passed down. They are scripted because, and I would hear stories like, oh, I was in Idaho. My grandmother was in Idaho. She was riding in the first wagon train, blah, 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 blah. And they would get to their next place, wherever it was, maybe it was another state entirely, and they would hear of a peddler that they'd already heard of, and they knew the script already.
Yep. The good ones get passed around. And
Exactly.
I try not to plagiarize, but there are things I have written and said that I have long since forgotten where I got them. You know, if it was a Zig story, I pretty much can remember all those. I'll give attribution to him and all the other greats I've had the honor of working with over the years. But there are some that are so ingrained in our society, I don't know that I'm stealing them anymore. Everything I've ever said, including everything I've said to you today and everything you've said to me, is stolen. Because when you came into the world, you didn't know any. So every word you
And some
use,
some days I still don't.
yeah, every word you use, every sentence you use, you picked up from somewhere over the years. Someone once said, and I give them credit, but I forget who it was, after the Bible was finished and Shakespeare died, the rest of us have just been moving words around.
That could very listen, there are no new ideas. There just aren't. There's different ways of expressing them. There's you can pick a fight over just about anything because that was my idea. It really wasn't. Oh, don't talk to me anymore. But that's just how it goes. Um, Going back very quickly. So at the end of this chapter, you said our old friend, the late Earl Nightingale, used to say, if you have a secret, write a book. Then place a copy in every library in the United States. Your secret will be safe. That was interesting. Did he really say I guess he really did say that.
Yeah, really said it from the stage and over dinner numerous times. And he was right because people don't read. I said to Dr. Napoleon Hill the first time he was at our house, and my wife, the late Marcia Gay, had left a copy of Think and Grow Rich on the coffee table at an angle where, as you entered that room, you came in from the right and it was aimed right at you. There was no way to miss it. It was embarrassing what she had done.
It
It
was
was
sweet.
and embarrassing. But I
Okay.
said, oh, look, Dr. Hill, a copy of Think and Grow Rich. How does it feel to have written one of the best-selling books in the history of mankind? And he said, best-selling, least read. And I have here on my desk an original, it was not original, but an old 75-year-old copy of Think and Grow Rich that a friend of mine bought at a garage sale and for me. And I wish we were on video so I could show it to you. The front of the book, it's hardcover, is cherry red like it just came out of the bookstore. The other side is cherry red just like it came out of the bookstore. The spine is bleached out to the point you almost can't read it. What happened was the nice lady who bought the book went to some appearance Dr. Hill gave somewhere. Her name was Grace Dixon, and he signed it for her to Mrs. Grace Dixon with best wishes, Napoleon Hill. And by the book, I had flashbacks to best-selling, least read. She bought it. The spine, by the way, has never been cracked, and I haven't cracked it either. When I went to open it after Sandra Nomer gave it to me, I realized, my God, this has never been read, except the only time it was opened was when Dr. Hill opened it to sign it. So I said, I'm going to leave it that way. But every time I look at that book, I think about what he said, because Mrs. Grace Dixon went to a lot of trouble to go to a meeting, stand in line, buy a book, take it home, stick it in the bookcase for the next 75 years. She never read a word of it.
In a way that is incredibly touching, and it's also very sad.
Mm-hmm. It is. She had and I hope she had a lovely life, but she had one of the secrets of life in her hands and stuck it in a bookcase like a trophy. And that's some of the great libraries that I've seen in individual people's offices. They're not things they've read. In fact, if you look at the bookcase, they couldn't have read if all they did all day long was read, they couldn't have read it.
Mhm.
My first flushing out, I gave 1,000 books to our local library because I realized I didn't have a bookcase. I had a trophy case. Look how smart I am. Look at all these books. All I had scanned, some I had read. Hardly any had I taken down and read again. So I thought, well, let's get it in the hands of someone who might read it. So I gave away 5,000 books. And Gigi pointed out to me the other day, I was about due for another 5,000 book cleaning. So apparently it's an illness.
Yes, I have the same problem. I have giant bookcases in my garage that were moved from, my other house, and they were in my rent house for a while and they moved here. Well, I have an open floor concept, no walls, very few walls. So these giant, literally giant handmade bookcases that run an entire wall in my garage. Now, you know how long a garage is. So they're covered with books, thousands of books. I've got books in my bedroom. In this room, my office, I have hundreds of books, and every single book here, including yours, were gifted to me by my podcast guests. And I have read or thumbed through all of them. And I do have a special shelf where they're the ones that you're on shelf number 2 over here, right by my tower, actually, my computer tower. I can just reach over and grab it because that shelf, those are the go-to books I always need to be digging in them. And there are other books like, oh, I need to go read that one again, and I will. But they've all been read at some level. Now, I do give away the duplicates because somehow or another I
Sure.
do wind up with a lot of duplicates, but I don't loan my books. If you want one, you go get it on your own. You're not taking my books. They're mine.
Because I know I will never see it again.
No, you never will. We are running out of time. So where can people find, well, first of all, what are we talking about next week?
I don't know. Let's announce it next week or in the between now and then. We got talking and I didn't pay much attention.
Okay.
So I will tell you during the week and you
Okay.
announce it when you announce it. And I'll give it the short version. If you want the closer series, which you ought to have
Yes.
for free shipping and special pricing, go to stores.ebay.com / all one word Ronzoni Books, RONZONEBOOKS. Stores.ebay.com / Ronzoni Books. Special pricing, and free shipping. I still sign them all and date them all, etc. And they all come with our standard unconditional lifetime money back guarantee. I'm talking fast because I want to save all the time left for you. Tell them finally about your new project that you're launching.
I'm finally ready. Listen, I've been podcasting for 16 years. As of this month, it is 16 years old, which is just shocking to me. But I've often been asked how my podcast, Your Partner in Success Radio, managed to soar to the top 2% of global popularity charts. When I tell you I'm shocked on a regular basis, I'm like, huh, all I'm doing is just chatting with people, but apparently it's a lot more than that. So now I've decided, after I've been asked a lot, to unveil what I do and how I can help others amplify their voices. And you'll hear me constantly say, get your voice heard. And 2024 is really the year to do that. So I've opened up my personalized podcast strategy calendar for 10 people. I can't handle more than 10 because it's pretty intensive. So if you're ready to elevate your podcast game in 2024, I'm telling you, if you're not podcasting as marketing 101, you're missing a sure bet. So consider joining me for a 3-hour recorded session, and you do pay for it, where we can turn your podcast dreams into reality. But before making any decisions, I want you to schedule a free consultation with me. And it's been wisely noted just a couple of times here today. People want to buy from and work with those they know, like, and trust and can feel safe with. So I'm not asking you to pay me if you don't know who I am. I want you to get to know who I am and find out if we really can work together to get your voice heard. So find more details and secure your spot by visiting the scheduler link on yourpartnerinsuccessradio.com. on the contact page, or call me toll free at 888-719-6711 to connect directly. Ben, thank you.
My pleasure. And I'm really excited about you getting your program up and running. Ladies and gentlemen, listen to me carefully. If you're going to do anything in podcasting or want to do anything in podcasting, Denise Griffitts knows more about it than just about anybody on the planet. And she's accessible to you. Take advantage of that. Reach out and contact her.
Thank you. Well, listen, everybody, thank you for joining us, and be sure to find us on Your Partner in Success Radio, which is the hosting for this particular podcast, and just look for our names. Look for the Closers Inner Circle podcast, look for Your Partner in Success Radio, or Ben Gay III, or Denise Griffitts. You can't throw a stick on the internet without hitting this podcast and our names. We're out there. Thank you, everybody. We will see you next Wednesday. Ben, tell Gigi hi.
I shall. And I know I haven't talked to her, but I know she sends her love. You have a wonderful day.
You too. Talk to you soon.